The Knife by R.L. Stine. Prologue. Gasping in panic, Lori slipped past the yellow and black signs warning danger, keep out, and pushed open the forbidden door. She shouldn't be in here. She didn't want to be here. But where else could she hide? The light was dim, the shadows deep and frightening in the deserted new hospital wing. The workmen had all gone home, and Lori was alone, stumbling in the gloom through the construction debris. Maybe he didn't see me. Maybe he won't follow me. Maybe I'm safe. Her long, honey blonde hair, usually so sleek, had escaped from its pins and was whipped in tangles around her shoulders. Her pretty face, usually so calm, was a mask of terror. Desperately, she moved deeper inside the new construction. Wires snaked along the floor and dangled from the ceiling. Twisted cables bulged from the holes in the wall, reaching out to clutch at her. There was a sudden flash of light as the door was opened. Trapped. Trying not to make a sound, Lori hugged the wall on the far side of the huge room. A wire snagged her sleeve. She uttered a little gasp as she twisted herself free. Then she heard the familiar voice. "Lori, I know you're in here. You can't hide from me." Tears of terror started in her eyes. "Come out, Lori," the voice urged. "I just want to talk to you. Won't you let me explain?" Inching along the wall, Lori felt the blood pounding in her throat. She couldn't see him, but she could feel his terrible presence. "I won't hurt you," the voice said softly. Did he say that to her too, just before he stabbed her? Lori's whole body trembled. Suddenly, in one great burst of motion, he was upon her. His hand seized her shoulders and pulled her back roughly. Lori tried to scream, but he clapped a hand over her mouth. She felt his hot breath on her cheek. Now, her only thought was, where is the knife? Chapter 1. 1 week earlier. "Hey, Lori, wait up!" From halfway down the corridor, Lori Masters turned to see a huge cloud of silver balloons drifting toward her. Bobbing along under them was a short, cute, dark-haired girl, clutching the balloon strings as if the helium could lift her to the ceiling. Sky Keeley, Lori's best friend, rushed up panting. "Where's the party?" Lori asked. "These are for the kid in room 901, Sky said. "He's got so many toys and flowers in there already, there's no room for him. What are you doing on the children's floor?" "I just got assigned here this morning," Lori said. "Some change from the orthopedic floor. You won't believe how many ways people find to break their bones." Sky rolled her eyes. "Tell me about it," she said dryly. "Come on," Lori said. "I have to deliver these x-rays to the nurses' station." The girls fell into step as they walked down the gleaming corridor, and Lori dropped the x-rays off. They were both wearing the drab tan tunics all student volunteers at Shadyside Hospital wore, but on Lori's willowy figure it didn't look bad. "Meet me in the cafeteria for lunch?" Sky asked. "Sure. Maybe today's the day you'll meet that handsome med student you've been dying to meet. Then you can retire for the rest of the summer and concentrate on your social life." "Get real. In this?" Sky stopped and gave a one-handed tug to her tunic with disgust. "I don't know how you managed to look so put together wearing it. It's not fair." Sky shook her dark curly hair with envy and despair. "Anyway, I wouldn't quit now. It's not the worst summer job I've ever had. I've stopped hating you for talking me into it." A nurse in starched white cap and uniform bustled up the hall, carrying a tray of medicines. She glowered at Lori and Sky as she came up to them. "Okay, girls, get on with your work. You can't just stand there chatting all day." Then she was off in a whish of skirt and a squeak of rubber-soled shoes. "Uh-oh," Sky said. "That's Nurse Wilton, Edith Wilton. Stay out of her way. They say she actually smiled once, but that was probably before you and I were born. Here's 901. See you at lunch." Sky pushed open the patient's door and shepherded her balloons inside. Lori continued down the hall a few steps. The noise of construction grew louder as she approached the new wing that would soon become part of the hospital. Outside the heavy door that blocked off the new wing and partly muffled the din, Lori saw the bright warning signs. Danger. Keep out. Inside, the brand new Franklin Fear Wing was being built with $10 million that Franklin had recently donated to Shadyside Hospital. A descendant of the Fear family, Franklin shared a family trait with his ancestor Simon Fear. He liked to have things named after him. The Fear Wing. Not exactly the greatest name for a hospital wing, Lori thought with a shiver. She stopped to listen to the workmen hammering, riveting, and sawing inside. In a sudden lull, she heard a very different sound. A child was sobbing nearby. She looked around. The quiet sound was coming from room 903. just across the hall. Lori crossed to the door and listened to the soft, pitiful, weary weeping that sounded as if it had been going on for a long time. She knocked softly on the door to room 903 and quietly tiptoed inside. A small boy was lying in the high white hospital bed. His head was turned away from the door. "Hello there," Lori said. The child did not turn toward her. He just continued crying, more softly now, his voice hoarse. Lori looked around the room. It was bare of flowers, toys, and cards. There was nothing to cheer up a sick, frightened child. "I came to visit you," Lori said. The crying stopped with a small gasp, but the little boy kept his face turned away. He stared out the window opposite the door, ignoring her. Lori stepped to the end of his bed and read the medical chart hanging there. Toby Dean, 3 years old, pneumonia. His temperature had been normal for several days, so he should be going home soon. Why was he so unhappy? She approached the far side of the bed. "Hi, Toby. My name's Lori. I work here." She looked down at the small, pale face. His sandy hair was tousled on the pillow, and his nose was sprinkled with sandy freckles. "I'm a student volunteer," Lori continued in a quiet voice. "I run errands, I deliver things, and sometimes I visit people who feel sad and lonely away from home. Is that how you feel?" Toby hiccuped once and sniffled. Lori pulled a tissue out of the box on the side table and dabbed at Toby's wet cheeks. He sniffled again and turned away. Lori took his small hand in hers. "I don't blame you. I'd cry too if I were stuck in here. But you're almost all better. I bet you'll be going home soon." A tiny sob escaped from the boy, and he squeezed his eyes tightly shut. "Don't feel like talking? That's okay. I'll just keep you company for a while." Lori stroked his soft hand, trying to soothe him. "Would you like me to read to you? I could go get a book and read you a really nice story. Would you like that?" The door opened abruptly, and Miss Wilton marched in. "What are you doing in here?" she demanded. I was just talking to Toby to cheer him up," Lori said. "Don't waste your time," Nurse Wilton said brusquely. "He won't talk to you. He won't talk to anyone. You're only bothering him, and you're in the way here anyhow. Will you please leave?" Lori was stung by the nurse's harsh tone, but she reminded herself that most nurses were terribly overworked and could get pretty grouchy. One of her friends at Shadyside High, Myra Barnes, said that her mother, who was also a nurse, was always tired and cranky. As Lori left the room, she glanced back once more at Toby. He was watching her now, his tear-filled eyes staring at her from behind Nurse Wilton's broad back. Lori felt a sudden jolt. She was sure that silently the child was pleading with her. Chapter 2. "What kind of meat is blue?" Skye asked as she plunked her tray down across the table from Lori. "Today's stew. Why didn't you get a salad?" Lori answered. "Too healthy, and I didn't see this up close until I got in the light. Yuck!" Skye settled herself at the table and stared at her plate. Around them, the noise of the cafeteria was deafening. Doctors and technicians in white lab coats bumped and jostled for seats at the long tables. The surgical teams in soft green caps, booties, and coveralls moved in groups searching for places together. Weary relatives of patients sat in hushed isolation as the hectic parade of tray-bearing hospital workers swirled around them. "Could I borrow a couple of those balloons you had this morning?" Lori almost had to shout as she leaned across the table and explained to Skye about Toby Dean. Maybe they'd cheer him up, if the kid in 901 wouldn't mind. "He wouldn't even miss them," Skye said. "Just open his door and the toys fall out. I'll get a few balloons this afternoon." A stethoscope dangled above Skye's plate as a nurse leaned over her shoulder to grab a packet of sugar from the center of the table. Skye pushed her stew away and stole a potato chip from Lori's salad plate. "How many raffle tickets did you buy so far?" Skye asked, crunching the chip and reaching for another. "Just one," Lori said, sliding her plate away. "I'm selling them, though, if you want more." "I've already got the winning one. I'm sure of it. I'm going to buy a brand new red outfit to match the car as soon as I win." Hundreds of Shadyside residents were competing for the red Mercedes-Benz sports car on display in the hospital lobby. It was the prize in a raffle to raise money for the Franklin Fear Wing. Lori had already sold 4 books of tickets to neighbors and people in town who found her hard to refuse, even if they had already bought a pocketful. "Don't trash your old Toyota until they hand you the keys," Lori warned. "What are you doing this Saturday? You got a date?" "2 dates. Jim Farrow and Eric Porter." Not again, Lori said. No fair. She disapproved of Sky's habit of accepting 2 dates for the same night, then deciding which one to break. I know, Sky shrugged. I trade them both in for Andy Price, whenever you get tired of them. Lori sighed. Like, how about now? I'm seeing him Saturday night. I wish I knew how to break up with him. Sky slurped her Coke and nodded. Yeah, I can really see why you'd want to dump him. He's just too good looking, and too much fun, and his dad is only Dr. Raymond Price, just about the most prominent man in Shadyside. Dr. Price is his stepfather, Lori reminded her. Give me a break, Sky said. He's also the administrator of this hospital, so you'd better not rock the boat with Andy while you're working here. What's so wrong with Andy? He's just so aimless, such a goof, Lori said, jabbing her fork at her salad. Not everyone wants to be a doctor like you. Sky really admired Lori, but sometimes she thought Lori ought to lighten up a little. I don't think Andy's serious about anything, Lori said, chewing thoughtfully. He's serious about you, Sky said. That's part of the problem. He's, well, clutchy. I don't like him trying to tie me down all the time. I have lots of interests, and sometimes I'd like to spend time with other guys. The white-coated orderly sitting next to Sky gathered up his dirty dishes and left the table. Sky was reaching for another of Lori's potato chips when she stopped, hand in midair, and sat up straight in her chair. Oh, wow. Speaking of other guys, check out who just walked in. Who? Lori refused to turn and stare. Would you believe Tom Cruise? Sky whispered ecstatically. It isn't. It couldn't be. Lori had to look. Right on both counts. It isn't, and it couldn't be. Tom Cruise is older, and he doesn't have red hair. It's not red. Well, reddish. Sky, stop staring at him, Lori exclaimed. He might not be as old as Tom Cruise, but he's too old for you. I bet he's in college. He wouldn't be interested in us. He's coming this way, Sky said breathlessly. Is this seat taken? A deep, pleasant voice asked. Sky smiled. Up close, the guy was every bit as good-looking as the actor, maybe even cuter. He was tall, with dark blue eyes, and his tight t-shirt showed that he was probably an athlete or someone who worked out with weights. The t-shirt was comical, white with big black letters that said, Wrong way, go back. Over one shoulder he had slung the telltale tan tunic that marked him as a fellow student volunteer. Be my guest, Sky said, making room. We were saving it for any student volunteer who wants to join us in taking over the hospital. Count me in, he said, laughing as he set down his hamburger and coffee. He was talking to Sky, but looking at Lori. He sat down and leaned across the table to be closer to her. I'm Rick Spencer, a 3-day veteran on the surgical floor. I'm Lori Masters, on the children's floor this week. She blinked her blue eyes and realized she was suddenly very warm. The source of heat was definitely Rick Spencer and his smile. Me too, Sky said. 9th floor, kids in construction. I'm Sky Keeley. Hey, I really like your t-shirt. Rick turned to her. You do? I've got the world's largest collection of t-shirts. It's my only claim to fame. He took a bite of his hamburger and turned back to Lori. How do you like it here? It's great, Lori said, responding to Rick's interest. It's what I've wanted to do all my life, work in a hospital. My aunt warned me I might get bored, but I just love every minute here. Lori's going to be a doctor, Sky said, if we ever graduate from Shadyside High. No kidding, Rick said, his eyes fixated on Lori as he sipped his coffee. I'm going into my 2nd year at South Bank College, and I'm thinking about going on to medical school. And I'm going to join a high-wire act in the circus, Sky mumbled to herself. Being ignored wasn't her favorite thing. I thought I'd better get some hospital experience before I made any heavy plans, Rick said to Lori. Why did your aunt think you'd be bored? Is she a doctor here? No, Lori answered. A financial consultant. She raised me after my parents died, and she always worries about me. Above the noise of the crowded cafeteria, a sudden, urgent announcement blared out over the paging system. Code Blue, room 903. Code team to 903, stat. Several doctors jumped up and ran out. Uh-oh, Sky said. Code Blue. They just called a code. Huh? Rick said. Lori explained. That's when a patient goes into cardiac arrest, like the heart stops or there's some other terrible emergency. There's a special medical team responsible. They can save a life if they get there fast enough. You just saw some of them running out. I guess I have a lot to learn. I didn't hear or see anything. Rick's expression suggested that he hadn't heard or seen anything except Lori. The announcement repeated. Code Blue, room 903, stat. You'll get used to it, Lori told him. Her mouth fell open in shock. Room 903 was little Toby Dean's room. The code team had been called for him. She pushed back her chair and ran out of the cafeteria. Chapter 3. Where's the fire? Nurse Jenny Gerard raised her head from her papers as Lori passed the ninth floor nurse's station. Lori didn't stop to answer. She flew down the hall, wondering why everything was so calm in such an emergency. The door to room 903 was closed, but she could hear Toby's terrified cries inside. She pushed open the door and stopped, stunned. Nurse Wilton was bent over Toby's bed. The child was thrashing and screaming as he tried to kick her away. Nurse Wilton looked over at Lori. You again? She straightened up, and Lori could see the hypodermic needle in her hand. What's your name? She demanded. Lori told her, stuttering slightly. I told you before to get out. The nurse grabbed Toby's arm as he tried to slide away from her. I heard them call a code blue for room 903, Lori explained. That was room 503, not the children's floor, Nurse Wilton snapped. I'm trying to draw blood here, and you're just making it harder. Toby stared at Lori as he gasped for breath through his tears. Maybe I can help. If I can talk to him, hold his hand, he may not mind the needle so much, Lori pleaded with the nurse. Just get out, right now, Nurse Wilton growled. You student volunteers are more trouble than help. Defeated, Lori gave Toby an encouraging smile, then turned and left. As she walked down the hall, she was so distracted that she almost crashed into an orderly wheeling a cart of lunch dishes around the corner. She headed for the nurse's station. Maybe Nurse Jenny Gerard could give her a clue about how to help Toby without bringing Nurse Wilton down on her head again. At the station, Nurse Gerard was arguing sympathetically with an agitated woman. I'm sorry, Miss Dean. I know how eager you are to take your son home, but the doctors won't release him until they're sure he's out of danger. It was Toby's mother, a large woman in a shapeless dress. Her fingers were clutching her pocketbook so tightly that Lori could see her white knuckles even from a distance. Try not to be upset, Nurse Gerard urged her. It won't be long now. He's doing fine. Maybe he can even go home tomorrow. Lori wanted to talk to Miss Dean, but she was afraid of making her more upset. She watched the woman get into the elevator, then turned back to the nurse's station. Nurse Wilton was heading down the hall away from her. Now was her chance. Moving quickly, she slipped back inside Toby Dean's room. He was quiet now, just staring out the window. Hello, Toby. It's Lori again. I know it's rough, but I just heard some good news about you. He didn't move. Really? The nurse said you would be going home very soon. Isn't that great? Toby turned his tear-stained face to Lori. Maybe even tomorrow. A flicker of hope lit the small face on the pillow. Your mommy will come and get you. Toby turned away without speaking and closed his eyes. Lori went to the side of the bed and held his soft hand. His breathing became regular. Just before he fell asleep, Lori felt his small fingers squeeze hers. She tiptoed out. Across the hall, the ominous signs in front of the new Fear Wing assaulted her eyes. Danger. Keep out. She shuddered. Why did they frighten her so? As she watched, she saw the door to the Fear Wing close, very slowly. Why would anyone be inside at this time of the day? All the workmen left during lunchtime. She had the distinct feeling that someone was hiding there, maybe watching Toby's room, or watching her. She started down the hall, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. She couldn't help but glance back at the door to the new wing. She caught sight of a man starting out the door. He quickly ducked back inside when he saw her. It was only a flash, but Lori thought she caught a glimpse of a tan tunic, of a white and black t-shirt. It was Rick Spencer, the new student volunteer she and Sky had met in the cafeteria. Chapter 4. The street outside was dark. Curled up on the sofa, Lori turned a page in the book she was reading and checked her watch again. After 10. Her Aunt Hillary certainly was working late. Lori snuggled down deeper into the sofa and their large, comfortable library, wishing that Hillary would get home soon. Their big old house in North Hills could get very lonely sometimes. Still, she was very proud of her aunt. Her work as a consultant to banks and large institutions often took her out of town for days or kept her out late at night. Lori gazed out the window at the dark night, and let her thoughts wander. She couldn't remember ever living anywhere except with her aunt. Her parents had been killed in a boating accident when she was very little, and Hillary, her mother's sister, was the only family she could remember. They looked so much alike that most people mistook them for mother and daughter. In many ways, Lori thought she was lucky. Her friends were always complaining about how their parents tried to control their lives. Hillary gave Lori lots of space, except when she was worried. But now it was Lori's turn to worry. She checked her watch again. 10:30. Where was she? The phone rang. Lori answered it, expecting it to be Hillary. No one spoke. "Hello? Hello?" Lori repeated. No reply. She could hear breathing, like someone listening. Some creeps from school playing phone tricks, probably. Didn't they know how lame that was? She was about to slam down the receiver when she heard the faint sound of an ambulance siren coming through it, growing louder. It was a sound she heard every day at the hospital. The line went dead. Lori stared at the phone, feeling uncomfortable. A few minutes later, the phone rang again, and she jumped. Reluctantly, she picked it up and said, "Hello? Is this Lori Masters?" "Who's this?" "Rick Spencer. We met in the cafeteria today. You ran out so suddenly that I wondered what was wrong." "How did you get my number?" Lori asked. "Oh, your friend gave it to me." "Sky?" Why hadn't Sky told her? "That's right," Rick said. "How come you left so fast? Was there any trouble?" Lori began to relax. "No, it was just a mistake. There's a kid on the 9th floor I've been worried about, in room 903. He's so cute, 3 years old and freckle-faced, but he cries all the time. I thought they had called the code for him, but it was room 503. Then she remembered. Rick, were you on the 9th floor this afternoon? In the Fear Wing?" "No. Why do you ask?" "No reason," she said. "Did you just call me a few minutes ago?" "Yes, but your line was busy. I wanted to ask if you were free Saturday night. Maybe we could get together. You know, stranger in town and all that." "Oh, I'm sorry. I've got a date." For a minute, she really was sorry. Then she thought of the person she had seen ducking back inside the hospital wing. Had she been wrong? "Some other time?" Rick asked. "Sure," she agreed. "We'll see each other at the hospital. Listen, I've got to go. My aunt may be trying to call, and I want to keep the line free." "Right. I'll look for you tomorrow," Rick said. Just as Lori was hanging up, she again heard the wailing of an ambulance siren through the phone, growing louder in her ear until the connection was cut. It sounded as if Rick was still at the hospital, long after student volunteers had left for the day. She sat there, puzzled. Then she punched Sky's number on the automatic dial button on the phone, even though she knew that her friend usually went to bed early. "I know it's late," Lori said, "but I just wanted to ask you one question. Did you give Rick my phone number?" "Who?" Sky mumbled. She sounded half asleep. Rick Spencer. The guy we met in the, Tom Cruise." "Oh yeah. No. I didn't give him your number. You want me to?" "Never mind," Lori said. "I'll see you tomorrow." After she hung up, Lori tried to sort out her confusion. Something wasn't right, but she didn't understand what. Had Rick been on her line twice that night? Was he the silent caller? What had he been doing at the hospital so late? And wasn't that Rick she had seen at the door of the Fear Wing? Lori didn't understand much, but she knew one thing for sure. Rick Spencer was a liar. Chapter 5. Lori had gone to bed before Aunt Hillary got home, and even though she was up early the next morning, her aunt had already left. Hillary must be working on a really big job, Lori figured. She spooned up some cottage cheese for her breakfast as she read the note her aunt had left her. "Hi, Cookie. Busy. Sorry I missed you last night. Don't look for me for dinner tonight. Working late again. Love you. H." Lori had a special mission that morning, and she was eager to get to the hospital early. She stuffed her tan tunic into her bag, grabbed her keys, and was annoyed when the phone rang and stopped her before she got out the door. "This is Dr. Price," the voice said. "Huh?" Lori cried in surprise. "I have a special assignment for you today. I want you to skip work and play tennis with my son." "Andy," Lori laughed. "You're under arrest for practicing medicine without a license. No tennis. No way." "Then how about a quick swim?" Andy insisted, switching to his real voice. "I mean it. No way," Lori said firmly. Today is a work day, and I'm in a rush. I hardly get to see you this summer, Andy complained. You're always busy. It's your own fault. You could have joined Sky and me at the hospital. Your father would have liked that. There are guys who are student volunteers, you know. Oh, like who? Lori sighed. Sooner or later she'd have to deal with Andy's jealousy. Gotta go. I'll see you Saturday. Wait, how about meeting me for pizza after work? Jim Farrell and I are going to Patsy's Pizzeria. Sky too, probably. Why not? It was better than fixing dinner for herself alone. Anything was better than that. Okay, I'll see you there. Bye. As she drove to Shadyside Hospital, Lori thought about Toby Dean. She'd do anything to bring a smile to that sad little face. That was her special mission for the morning. At the hospital, she dodged the early morning traffic on the main floor and hurried to the gift shop. Books and newspapers, toiletries, flowers, candy, fruit baskets, cards, and t-shirts crowded the small space. Also, there was a shelf filled with toys and stuffed animals, just right to cheer up a sick child. Lori studied the display for a while, then chose a fluffy little teddy bear for Toby. Eager to bring it to him, she was impatient in the line to pay. She joined the mob in the elevator on the ride up to the children's floor. The hall was empty. Even the nurses' station was unattended. That early in the morning, the nurses were all busy in patients' rooms. As she walked down the 9th floor corridor, Lori smiled, anticipating Toby's happy response to her gift. Look who came to see you, she called, holding out the teddy bear as she entered room 903. She stopped, stunned. The room was empty. The bed had been stripped. All the equipment that had crowded the tables and chest top was gone. There was no sign of Toby. Oh no, Lori cried. He's dead. Chapter 6. Dead, Lori repeated, her lips trembling. Still holding the teddy bear, she dropped the bag and her tunic on the empty bed and ran out to find the floor nurse. Someone. Anyone. She knew that Toby couldn't have left the hospital so early. Patients weren't discharged until after the staff doctors saw them on their 11 o'clock rounds. What could have happened to him in the night to cause such a tragedy? At the nurse's station, she almost skidded to a stop. There he was, dressed in Oshkosh overalls and a yellow shirt, his hand firmly held by his mother. Lori was almost weak with relief. Toby Dean was alive. He was so cute with his sandy hair neatly combed and the toes of his little sneakered feet turned in toward each other that Lori could have rushed up and hugged him. How come they were letting him leave so early? It was then that Lori noticed Miss Stine was in a deep conversation with Rick Spencer. What was he doing on the children's floor? He had said that he was working on surgical. And what were he and Toby's mother talking about? He leaned toward Miss Stine as he spoke, holding his tan tunic over one shoulder. That day's t-shirt was black with bright red flames and a big Harley-Davidson logo. He certainly has tacky taste, Lori thought. As she stood watching them, Toby noticed her at the end of the hall. Lori smiled and held out the teddy bear. His sad eyes brightened, and he pointed to himself, silently asking, For me? Lori nodded. Toby glanced up at the empty nurse's station, then at his mother and Rick. They were too engrossed in their conversation to notice him. He slipped out of Miss Dean's grasp and walked shyly toward Lori. Teddy would have cried if you had left without him, Lori said. She put the fluffy stuffed animal in Toby's arms. He hugged it tightly and buried his face in its soft fur. You and he are going to be great friends, right? Lori said. Toby nodded but didn't speak. I'm really glad you're going home, but I'll miss you. Promise me that every time you hug Teddy, you'll think of me, because I'll be thinking of you. Toby reached up and took Lori's hand. He seemed reluctant to leave her. You'll feel much better once you get home. Now, won't you say goodbye to me? Just one little word? Lori asked. Toby shook his head. Resigned, Lori knelt and hugged him. Okay, Toby. Be a good boy, and be nice to Teddy. She kissed his cheek and turned him toward his mother. Better go now. Your mommy is waiting for you. Toby turned back to her. She's not my mommy, he whispered, and tears welled up in his eyes.